Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a political movement, right, aimed at fundamentally reshaping a major party. Not from the top down, with big donors or national campaigns.
Right.
But from the absolute ground level. We're talking grassroots.
Driven by some really intense beliefs, yeah. And frustrations.
Exactly. Especially around, distrust concerning the 2020 election.
That's right. The sources you shared with us, they really delve into this grassroots strategy that got this huge signal boost.
And saw people just coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah, exactly. To get involved in the most local parts of the Republican Party structure, it was pretty remarkable.
And the core concept here, it's called the precinct strategy, promoted really heavily on platforms like Steve Bannon's War Room.
That's the one.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to go through your sources, pull out the key insights, and understand what this strategy is, who was pushing it, how it played out in places like, say, Georgia and Arizona.
Right, those specific case studies.
And its perceived impact on the broader political landscape. And we're drawing only from the material you've provided.
It's a really fascinating look at how ideas spread,
Yeah.
and how they translate into actual action at the local level.
Okay, let's jump in then.
Let's do it.
So let's start with the beginning, the genesis and spread of this strategy.
Okay.
The material points to a man named Dan Schultz and his core idea.
Right.
Getting people involved at the smallest political unit, which in many states means becoming a precinct committee member or chair, hyper-local.
And what's fascinating here, the sources say, is how this idea, it wasn't entirely new.
Right, no.
But it just suddenly exploded in visibility.
How did that happen?
Well, Steve Bannon, particularly after he interviewed Dan Schultz on War Room,
okay,
he became a major champion of the whole concept. He really pushed it.
And the sources show the reaction was, immediate. Viral, even.
Totally. The idea just rocketed across those alternative social networks.
Like Gab and Telegram?
Exactly. Platforms where a lot of Trump supporters were active.
And the numbers.
We're talking about Dan's blog seeing traffic spikes of almost 100,000 hits.
Wow.
In just a few days after getting that signal boost from Bannon.
So the impact was felt pretty quickly on the ground then?
Oh, yeah. And it often surprised the existing party structures.
How so?
County GOP chairs in places all over Miami, Polk County in Florida, Fort Worth, Texas, Outagamie County in Wisconsin.
Or widespread.
They reported suddenly seeing this flood of strangers wanting to join their committees, people they didn't know.
And some of these newcomers were even using slightly incorrect terms.
Yeah, like asking to be precinct committeemen in states where that wasn't even the official title.
Which the sources note kind of highlights the patchwork nature of state party systems, right?
Absolutely. What the job is called, how it works.
Yeah.
It varies a lot state to state.
Caused some confusion, I guess.
A bit, yeah. But it clearly didn't stop this wave of new interest.
So a key insight right away then is how quickly a targeted message on specific media platforms could translate directly into widespread grassroots action.
Bringing in activists who were motivated by this shared sense of urgency, definitely.
Okay, let's take a closer look now at how this actually played out in one specific place.
Right.
The source provides a really detailed case study in Cobb County, Georgia, and the story of Sally Grubbs.
Yes, Sally's journey. The material paints a really vivid picture. It offers a window into the motivations, the experiences of these new activists.
And the outgoing Cobb County GOP chair, Jason Shepard, he actually recognized the materials these new volunteers were using.
He did. They were his own training documents, apparently.
No way.
Yeah. And initially he thought, okay, this influx, this is a positive thing, more people involved.
But his view on the 2020 election results, it was different from a lot of these newcomers.
Markedly different, yeah. The sources say he knew the election wasn't stolen in a way that would change the outcome.
He acknowledged maybe some isolated fraud, but not enough to matter.
Right. Not outcome changing. He actually found the results pretty predictable based on turnout models he'd seen.
Didn't he even warn the Trump campaign?
He did. He warned them they were likely to lose Georgia if they didn't get the turnout they needed.
And the material includes a sort of telling anecdote from Jason about priorities right after the election.
Oh, yeah. He recounts how state party staff were pulled off ballot curing.
Which is helping fix mail ballots so they actually count?
Exactly that. They were reassigned to staff a rally for Donald Trump Jr. the day after the election.
And Jason's reaction?
According to the source, basically. Are you kidding me? Just disbelief.
Okay, so against this backdrop of, existing party dynamics and this post-election frustration, the sources introduced Sally Grubbs. She's running for county chair.
Despite being active for less than a year, which is pretty unusual.
And she was recruiting followers using Dan Schultz's video.
Yeah, directly implementing the precinct strategy playbook.
The source gives us a lot on her background, right?
A really rich picture. Voted Republican for decades, watched Fox, listened to Limbaugh.
Standard conservative media diet for many.
Right. And believed in various scandals that had circulated in those circles over the years. Benghazi, Seth Rich, the list.
But politics was more of a side interest before.
It seems so. Influenced by her attorney father, who believed strongly in the right to a fair trial, even for unpopular defendants.
And she became more active online.
Started spending more time on Facebook, yeah. Became what she called a keyboard warrior.
Interestingly, the material notes her initial reaction to the pandemic. It was pretty cautious.
Yeah, at first, wiping groceries, praying for healthcare workers, even found the Trump and Fauci briefings reassuring initially, supported relief programs.
But that changed
significantly. As restrictions dragged on, Trump's stance shifted on reopening, on masks.
And that influenced her.
It did.
Yeah.
And she was reading columnists comparing emergency powers to tyranny. Suddenly, those warnings about Democrats controlling lives felt very, very real to her.
And this tied into her growing suspicion about the voting changes during the pandemic.
Absolutely. Expanded mail ballots, drive-through voting, these new voting centers.
Things done because of COVID.
Right, but she started seeing them as part of a deliberate plan, not just improvised emergency changes.
Contrasting it with her memories of traditional voting.
Yeah, voting with her dad in a booth with a curtain. She couldn't grasp why Home Depot was safe, but her local precinct wasn't.
And Trump's claims about mail ballots being rife for fraud.
That fueled it heavily. The idea that these changes were a plot to steal the election took hold.
The sources also connect this to the summer 2020 protests after George Floyd's murder.
Right. The confusion, for her and others, was that large crowds seemed okay for protests after all the stay-at-home orders.
Plus the clashes, the property destruction.
The burning of the Wendy's after the Rayshard Brooks incident in Atlanta. That really hit home.
So she and many Republicans, the sources say, saw protesters as inciting violence.
And in that context, the pandemic voting changes looked even more suspicious.
The whole, if you can protest in person, you can vote in person argument.
That resonated deeply. She felt things were out of control, posted an upside-down flag on Facebook, a distress signal.
And there was a personal turning point described, too.
Yeah, involving her son.
Yeah.
A crisis he had about not planning to have kids, which she felt wasn't in God's plan.
And that spurred her.
It did. A realization she couldn't just be a keyboard warrior anymore.
Mm-hmm.
This election felt too important for her family's future.
So that's when she contacted the county GOP to volunteer.
That's the moment described in the source, yeah.
So a key insight from Sally's story, it seems to be how this mix of things.
Right. Personal values, shifting political views, influenced by media, by events.
And this deep distrust of the system, especially the election process.
It motivated people like her to move from just watching to getting actively involved on the ground.
Exactly what the precinct strategy called for.
Precisely.
Okay, so she gets involved. Then the sources detail the Cobb County hand recount.
Ordered by the Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, under a lot of pressure.
And the official line was, no major issues found.
Election officials said, expect some human error, but affirmed no anomalies were found that would change the outcome.
But Sally's experience observing it was different.
Very different, according to the sources. She felt she needed binoculars to see from behind the caution tape.
Started getting suspicious about things like ballot color or weight.
Yeah, and how big certain stacks of ballots looked. Being told there was nothing to see in another area just felt dismissive, fueled her distrust.
And it was there she met Susan Knox.
Yes. They became, as the source puts it, sisters in arms.
Susan was pushing the boundaries more.
Yeah, trying to observe more closely, getting into confrontations with supervisors.
And posting videos online calling it a fraud.
Right. Using inflammatory language, comparing it to Nigeria, describing workers' appearances and accents, even using racial slurs like black as spades.
Then, a week later, came the incident with the shredding truck.
A really pivotal moment in the narrative. Susan saw this A1 shredding and recycling truck, and a man wheeling bins labeled official absentee ballot envelopes towards it, and a box that said shred.
Her reaction?
Immediate alarm, adrenaline surge. She called 911. They're shredding ballots, she reported. describing the driver.
Sally gets the call.
Bolts from work, drives fast, parks her car sideways to try and block the truck. Like Starsky and Hutch, she apparently thought.
They photographed the truck, tried talking to the driver.
Yeah. He covered his face, which just made them more suspicious.
And a second 911 call.
Confirmed police were busy. But the operator apparently mentioned a black male with a white shredding machine. Susan commented on the importance of the election.
Then they actually chased the truck.
For 11 miles. Until Sally ran out of gas.
Seriously?
Yeah. Ditched her car, jumped into Susan's Mercedes, which had a Trump sign, playing Soultown radio.
Sally compared them to Thelma and Louise.
Or Lucy and Ethel, the source says. The driver was driving evasively, running a red light. They got worried, turned back.
Back at the park, the police eventually showed up.
But Sally figured staff called them, not because of her 911 calls. They told her the area was closed.
And at the police station.
Directed to a wall phone. Operator says police aren't taking election complaints. Call the Secretary of State.
Her reaction, as described.
Disbelief. Rolling her eyes. Sarcastic thanks. This whole experience just cemented her suspicion of widespread corruption. Why didn't they care about a crime in progress?
So the aftermath of this, their posts went viral.
Hugely viral. Amplified by people like Lynn Wood.
Even though the county said it was routine disposal of empty envelopes, ballots were safe.
Right. But for Sally, the evidence was destroyed. It was proof in her mind that Republicans couldn't have lost. She remained completely unconvinced by the official explanation.
A few weeks later, late December 2020, she testified at a state capitol hearing.
Hoping to convince lawmakers to reject the results, award Georgia's votes to Trump.
Susan testified first, but didn't have proof of ballots being shredded.
Correct. A senator specifically asked for photos of ballots, not just envelopes. Susan insisted but didn't have them.
Then Sally testified. The sources describe her appearance, her demeanor shifting.
Yeah. Started calmly, but got really emotional, loud, pounded the podium.
Especially when reading that Facebook post from the Secretary of State's chief of staff.
Linking fraud claims to supporting Iran. She shouted, "Explain to me how I'm like someone from Iran."
Expressed feeling lied to, seeing fraud, being stabbed in the back by elected officials.
Demanded a special session, claimed fraud was happening again in the ongoing Senate runoffs. The audience applauded.
Rudy Giuliani was there too?
Yeah, he testified, called the Cobb recount a joke. Sally felt validated. Rudy gets it.
She met him.
She did. And he offered to connect her with John Eastman, the lawyer advising Trump on election challenges.
Her testimony went viral too then.
Oh, yeah. The woman who chased a shredding truck narrative took off. Strangers congratulating her. She felt like a legend.
And the sources traced this shredding incident all the way to the White House.
Apparently, DOJ official Jeffrey Clark heard about the testimony.
And Trump brought it up on that call with Raffensperger.
He did, asking about the shredding. Raffensperger's lawyer explained it was normal office shredding. Investigated.
Trump's reaction.
Doesn't pass the smell test. He laughed. It mirrored Sally's own feelings exactly.
So the testimony didn't change the legislature's mind.
No special session. Disappointing for her, but the experience was thrilling, and she made strong friendships.
This energy carried her forward.
Definitely. She found comfort listening to Bannon's War Room, heard Dan Schultz again, decided against a third party.
The infrastructure was in the RNC, she felt.
Right. So she aimed higher than just precinct chair. Susan encouraged her to run for county chair.
Mobilized her network using that hearing video.
Yeah, as her calling card. Described herself at a forum as the dedicated woman who chased the shredding truck.
Which got laughs and cheers.
It did. And she won. April 2021. First ballot, nearly a supermajority.
The meeting was packed.
Had to move it to a church, full of new members, reminded her of that movie Network. Mad as hell. Not going to take this anymore.
Her victory speech.
Great day in Georgia. Patriots are at work. Turn Cobb red again. A clear signal of change.
Jason Shepard handed her the gavel.
Acknowledged their disagreement, but said, "We start today."
Post-win, she became a symbol.
A poster child for the precinct strategy's success. Radio interviews, direct contact with Schultz, national group threads.
And then the phone call.
Just days after her election. Block number. She guessed who it was.
The meeting stopped.
Yeah, she mouthed President Trump.
Yeah.
Stepped outside, put him on speaker for her secretary.
How did Trump get her number?
The Georgia state chair apparently told him her story, an example of regular people being inspired.
And Trump praised her.
Called her a real winner, proud of her big victory, an America First candidate.
Sally's reaction.
Found him very polite, a perfect phone call. Felt it might change critics' minds about him.
Wow. What a journey. Sally's story really illustrates the strategy's impact, how it empowers individuals to take over local party roles.
Absolutely. But the sources also give us a very different perspective from Arizona.
Right, Maricopa County. Through the eyes of Kathy Petzes. Let's shift there.
Okay. Kathy's described as the GOP chair for Legislative District 28 in Maricopa.
And she's presented differently. A lifelong Republican.
Very much so. Family roots in Arizona politics going back before statehood. Commitment to democracy in her DNA, as the source puts it. Her uncle was state chair under Reagan, her role model.
She experienced this influx, too. The sources call it a haboob.
Yeah, like a massive dust storm, a sudden flood of PC applications after that Bannon segment aired.
The volume jumped dramatically.
Hugely. From maybe 2-3 a month to 40-50 a week. It definitely didn't seem accidental.
And these new applicants were different?
Strangers, not the usual known volunteers or grassroots folks she was used to. As an experienced PC herself, she saw the shift immediately.
So she started screening them.
Held coffee meetings. 132 of them, the source says. Asked why they wanted the role, where they heard about it, their news sources.
And what she found?
Disturbed her, according to the sources.
Their news sources.
Often OANN, Newsmax, Gateway Pundit. Highly partisan, often conspiracy-minded outlets.
And their beliefs.
Centered on a vast conspiracy. The election being stolen, hints of QAnon theories, the global cabal, child sex traffickers, that sort of thing.
And their main motivation.
Hearing about the precinct strategy on Bannon's podcast. That was the consistent answer.
So a key insight from Kathy's experience. It's how Bannon's messaging attracted a specific type of activist.
Exactly. Motivated by these conspiratorial beliefs and deep distrust. It fundamentally changed who was trying to get into these local party committees.
It wasn't just about filling empty seats.
No, it had a clear ideological dimension.
Did Kathy look into the Bannon-Schultz connection?
She looked up the video, yeah. Found it extreme garbage. Couldn't finish watching it.
Tried contacting Schultz.
She knew him from county functions. Called, left a message. He never called back. First time he wouldn't engage with her.
The sources give some context on the Arizona GOP itself, not her uncle's party anymore.
Right. She'd spent years fighting extremists within the party. Mentioned the whole birtherism thing back in 2012.
Contrasted it with John McCain.
Yeah, McCain taking the mic from that woman, calling Obama an Arab, correcting her. That kind of old-school republicanism felt gone.
Kathy's own view of Trump.
Didn't see him as a conservative. Disliked his rhetoric about women, immigrants, Muslims, Putin. Sided with McCain.
Felt it was a cult of personality.
Yes, and that bothered her as both a Republican and someone committed to democracy. Felt everything he did was for himself, not the party.
She couldn't vote for him in 2020.
Couldn't bring herself to. But wouldn't vote Democrat either. Her Republican identity was too core.
She was surprised people bought the fraud claims, especially Republican officials.
Yeah, officials elected on the very same ballots they were now questioning. It didn't make sense to her.
How did she view the Maricopa County supervisors who certified the election?
As heroes, friends and neighbors who stood up, told the truth, did the right thing.
Even though the party condemned them and they got threats?
Yes. She saw their actions as courageous.
Kathy had actually faced a leadership challenge before the big precinct strategy push.
She did. From a newcomer with inflammatory social media, Kathy trounced her, won 80% of the vote.
Gave her some confidence.
Temporarily, yeah. That maybe the extremism wasn't representative of her district.
But by 2021, things had changed.
Exactly. She was suddenly in meetings with QAnon believers who were now PCs in her own district.
How did they get in if she screened people?
The county chair, described as a Trump loyalist, used a procedural loophole. Appointed rejected applicants to technically open seats, bypassing Kathy and her co-chair, Derek's objections.
Even though Kathy thought it was against the bylaws.
Yeah. Derek thought the chair probably had the authority. Either way, they couldn't stop it.
So, another key insight from Arizona. Even if local chairs tried to filter applicants,
the strategy could find other routes, like these county-level appointments.
Getting ideologically motivated people into core positions anyway.
Exactly. It shows the multi-pronged nature of the effort.
And this was all happening during the Maricopa County forensic audit.
Right. That whole spectacle in 2021, commissioned by the state Senate, funded by Patrick Byrne, run by Cyber Ninjas, a firm with no experience but strong beliefs in conspiracies.
Live streamed, looking for bamboo fibers.
Yeah, all that. The county supervisors refused to cooperate, called it an adventure in never, never land.
And the audit ultimately confirmed Biden won.
It did. But the promoters still claimed tens of thousands of illegal ballots, way more than Biden's margin. That just fueled demands for audits elsewhere.
Meanwhile, the new PCs in Kathy's district were causing trouble.
Mayhem, the source calls it. Shutting down school board meetings over masks, protesting outside a hotel, housing asylum seekers.
Her district lost its meeting space because of them.
Yeah, the venue didn't want these people. Kathy felt their behavior was worse than embarrassing. It was unhealthy for the party and democracy.
Her friend and mentee, Derek Ruckwalek, was facing similar issues in his district.
Yeah, LD15. He was also swamped with these new PCs, convinced they were gunning for both him and Kathy.
So he came up with a plan.
A pretty drastic one. Resign, along with his officers, to paralyze the committee. Prevent the newcomers from taking over leadership immediately.
Did it work?
Sort of. It immobilized the committee for months. But it also emboldened the new PCs. They eventually reorganized anyway and saw it as a precinct strategy victory.
Kathy's view.
Self-destructive. Hated seeing a young leader like Derek pushed out.
But Kathy thought her own seat was safe.
She did the math. Fewer open slots in her district. Believed her neighbors, her district, the party members she knew still sided with her.
But then the sources introduced Marissa Hamilton.
An applicant Kathy didn't meet with because of her voting record, hadn't voted in the 2018 Republican primary, wasn't registered Republican consistently.
Marissa felt silenced.
Yes. And she believed strongly in her dead voter project.
What was that?
She reviewed old voter rolls, found what she claimed were about 40 ballots returned from deceased voters. The state AG investigated, found only one actual case.
But Marissa saw finding even one as a success.
She did, and later, when she received a mail ballot for an abusive ex at her address, she saw it as retaliation for her research, not just a mistake.
And she was inspired by the takeover in Derek's district.
Yeah. Did you see what they did? She reportedly said. Approached a PC recruiter, Dan Farley,
who agreed to help target Kathy.
We're firing Petses, he reportedly said.
So Marissa's story shows how the general feeling of distrust and seeing the strategy work elsewhere
motivated people to target established leaders like Kathy, even if their specific issue, like voter rolls, was slightly different.
It highlights how the movement wasn't just one thing, but united by this core distrust and desire to replace the old guard.
Exactly. Using whatever means necessary procedure, organization at that local level.
Okay, let's move to our final section from the source material. The Virginia model and the national picture, including how that Bannon-Dan Schultz alliance evolved.
Right. The sources say that relationship started to fray.
Why?
Bannon reportedly found Dan Schultz too dry. Not enough of a marketing guy. Always focused on unfilled slots, not celebrating the wins enough.
Bannon got frustrated.
Apparently snapped at him, told him he sucked as a salesman, put the audience in a coma. Pretty harsh.
So Dan started going on other shows.
Fringier ones, yeah. Talking about crypto, 9/11 theories, even QAnon stuff.
He interviewed QAnon figures, even though he was skeptical.
Yeah, like Tracy Diaz or Beans. He apparently hoped to convert her followers to the precinct strategy. And the sources note Beans and her supporters did get elected to a state party committee after talking with Bannon.
Meanwhile, Bannon found other partners.
To amplify the message, yeah. Steve Stern in Florida described as a born salesman, energetic, Mr. Glass half full.
Modeled patriotic clothes on the show.
That's what the source says, yeah. And the other key partner was John Fredericks.
The talk radio host.
Right. Big regional influence in Georgia and Virginia. Even if not a huge national name like Limbaugh or Shapiro.
Reached a specific audience.
Millions, mostly right-wing blue-collar listeners. People maybe too busy for primetime TV. He identified strongly as a Trump supporter, hated the establishment GOP.
He had an interesting personal story, too. Overcoming a stutter.
Yeah, credited teaching low-income students and later radio with helping him beat it.
And his politics were shaped by personal experience.
Losing his home after a failed newspaper venture, seeing banks bailed out while his family struggled. That really shaped his views.
Made Bannon's message resonate.
Deeply. When Bannon talked about the haves and have-nots from the 2008 crisis, Fredericks felt, oh my God, Stephen K. Bannon is talking about me. He felt Bannon got why people felt like deplorables, why the working class felt screwed, why Trump won.
And Fredericks helped launch War Room.
His wife apparently talked to Bannon. They decided to start the show War Room. Impeachment, almost immediately. Fredericks gave Bannon airtime on his network. They cross-promoted heavily as the show evolved.
Fredericks was deeply involved in the Georgia runoffs after 2020.
Camped out there for 8 weeks, the sources say. Told the White House his callers wouldn't vote for Perdue or Loeffler, unless they fought harder for Trump's fraud claims.
Put the incumbents in a tough spot.
A real bind. Run on checks and balances or alienate Trump's base. Many blamed Trump's fraud talk for suppressing turnout and losing those seats in the end.
What was Frederick's takeaway from that?
According to the sources, his lesson was, Trump supporters lost faith. They needed to be brought inside the system. They needed to become the party.
Made him a big booster for the precinct strategy in Georgia's reorganization.
A leading cheerleader. He even had Sally Grubbs on his show, celebrating her as a superhero.
Then he turned his focus to Virginia's 2021 governor's race.
Right. An off-year election. State trending blue. But Bannon got interested. Backlash was brewing. Angry parents at school boards, masks, curriculum debates, rising inflation, the messy Afghanistan withdrawal, Biden's approval dropping. Suddenly, even Virginia looked winnable for Republicans.
But Fredericks warned Bannon.
Said Virginia would be another Georgia loss unless voters believed their votes would actually count. Election integrity was key.
And the sources point out the RNC was realizing something similar.
Yeah, a parallel track. That Kellyanne Conway survey showing 70% of GOP voters thought 2020 was stolen.
So Ronna McDaniel made election integrity a top priority.
Right. Not necessarily just cynical, the sources suggest. A real concern that this belief was depressing turnout.
Their plan.
Full-time election integrity directors in swing states, starting in Virginia.
So Virginia became a test case where the grassroots precinct strategy energy met this top-down RNC focus.
Exactly. A groundswell of activity monitoring polls, county GOPs starting election integrity subcommittees, scrutinizing voter rolls, signing up poll watchers, all feeding into the Youngkin campaign and the RNC effort.
So a key insight here. The belief in election fraud, true or not, became this powerful organizing principle.
Absolutely. It aligned the bottom-up energy of precinct strategy folks with the top-down party machinery focusing on election mechanics, a real force multiplier.
There was that rally Fredericks hosted near Richmond, October 2021.
Yeah, with Bannon there, Trump calling in, and it kicked off with the Pledge of Allegiance.
To a flag specifically described as being carried at the January 6th rally.
Carried at the peaceful rally with Donald J. Trump on January 6th is how the source quotes it. The crowd cheered.
Youngkin wasn't there. What was his reaction?
He'd called in earlier. When asked later, he kind of demurred, wasn't involved, didn't know, but if true, shouldn't pledge allegiance to it. His campaign called it weird and wrong.
But Bannon and Fredericks saw his overall strategy differently.
Yeah, they thought it was brilliant. Walking that tightrope, mobilize the base, appeal to moderates.
Avoiding a clear stance on whether Biden won or on Jan 6.
Exactly. But the sources point out that while he avoided saying things publicly, he campaigned with a state senator who called rioters patriots, supported her calls for audits.
They even seemed to entertain that Trump reinstatement idea.
To a woman outside his office, yeah. Said he didn't know the particulars, court system, unclear. Campaign tried to clean it up as him just being polite.
How did Bannon and Fredericks spin this for their audience?
They insisted Youngkin clearly believed the election was stolen. Why? Because he was pouring millions into Virginia to set up a voter integrity infrastructure.
His actions spoke louder than words, in their view.
That was the argument. He was speaking with his actions, doing what was needed to stop another stolen election. Bannon agreed. Youngkin knows they stole it and that they'll steal it again.
So another key insight from Virginia, how figures like Bannon and Fredericks interpreted investment in election integrity.
As proof, implicit validation of the fraud claims. Evidence the candidate was on their side, regardless of careful public statements.
Election night, November 2021. Did the tightrope work?
It did. Youngkin won, outperformed Trump in key areas.
There was that glitch in Fairfax County.
Yeah, delaying results. Republicans immediately murmured, the steal is happening again. Trump put out a statement.
But it was fixed quickly.
Yeah, glitch resolved. McAuliffe conceded. Youngkin won.
What were the implications of that win, according to the sources?
Exciting for the movement, obviously, but also maybe a little threatening.
How so?
Could the MAGA movement exist, maybe even thrive, without Trump always at the center? Was it becoming institutional, durable? Were Bannon and Fredericks becoming independent power centers? Questions like that.
Bannon's spin on the win.
Gave a shout-out to the War Room posse, the precinct strategy, the election officials. Said the coalition worked. Youngkin came toward our policies.
And Fredericks' spin.
MAGA voters control the party if they get out and they vote. The lesson. Become a poll watcher. Get trained. Build that stop the cheat infrastructure.
He claimed the Fairfax glitch was stopped because
simply too many eyes on it for them to cheat. That, he presented, was the model going forward. Stop the steal through overwhelming presence and scrutiny.
Okay, so let's try to bring these different threads together now.
Yeah.
The precinct strategy. It starts as this idea fueled by intense disbelief about the 2020 election.
Gets amplified hugely by key figures like Bannon, Fredericks.
And then implemented on the ground by determined individuals, people like Sally Grubbs, the new PCs who showed up in Arizona.
And the sources really give us contrasting experiences of how that played out.
Right. Sally finds success, takes over a county party, feels empowered, even gets that validating call from Trump.
While Kathy Petsis sees her party fundamentally changing from within, clashes with newcomers whose motivations she finds deeply disturbing.
And ends up being targeted by the same kind of strategy she herself tried years earlier to counter extremism.
And Derek Waller's tactical retreat. It delayed things, but his committee was still taken over. Seen as a loss for the establishment, a win for the precinct strategy folks.
So, drawing solely from the material provided in this deep dive, it seems clear that whether the fraud allegations were true or false isn't the main point driving the action here.
Right. The belief in election fraud became this incredibly powerful organizing principle.
It motivated activists, it shifted control within the party locally, and it definitely influenced state-level campaign strategy like we saw in that Virginia model.
And just to reiterate for everyone listening, we've explored these events and perspectives strictly as they are described in the sources we were given. We're not taking sides on the political content itself.
Absolutely. Our goal was just to unpack what the material presented.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Yeah.
How does this widespread belief in a stolen election fundamentally reshape a political party? Not just its rhetoric, its talking points.
But its actual internal structure, the kinds of people who get involved.
Exactly. Its whole approach to elections, to participation. What might the long-term effects be when core party functionaries, the people doing the day-to-day work, are motivated primarily by this deep-seated distrust of the very system they're now joining and being